Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry, I'm a little late. Okay, so good afternoon once again. Sorry for the delay or for me being late. I want to start today's section by first acknowledging the fact that you've been able to join us since Monday to today, and I am happy that we are going together. At least we are trying to provide a way that will help each one of us, whether registered or potential, be able to join or to be able to write the test. I would please that when you join, you mute your microphone so that it wouldn't kind of create a feedback anytime, or it wouldn't create a feedback. So please mute your microphone so that we don't have feedbacks. Okay, so we are trying to continue our lesson. We are continuing our lesson today, and sorry that I'm counting because I was rushing to get here. Okay, so we want to continue our lesson today as we did. We started on Monday and continued on Tuesday. We want to continue today with the part 2 of the writing task, and then we will take a little bit on the reading. So yesterday we discussed task 1 in the writing test. So today we want to continue by discussing task 2 in the writing test. And then just to remind ourselves that yesterday and then the previous day, we spoke on Monday especially, we spoke briefly about how the whole test looks like or how the test is. And then on Tuesday, we discussed briefly some of the tips, most important guidelines that we need in order to be able to take the task 1 of the writing test. As you already know, the writing aspect of the IELTS is more or less in 2 different sections: writing task 1 and then writing task 2. So in the writing task 1, you will be required to fulfill a particular task as we discussed yesterday. But then in writing task 2, you will also be required as well to fulfill another task. But one thing that we should know is that there is a difference between the writing task of the academic test and then the writing task of the general test. So you will have to look at the type of IELTS test that you have registered, and then you know what to expect and how to attempt it. So in the writing task 1, as we discussed, if you are given a graph, if you are given any kind of diagram, there are certain things that you have to consider before attempting and then before answering the test, because you should even know how to even organize your information before you can start it. Now, organizing your information and organizing your work is also a requirement that, or a category of scoring, because you should be able to organize it in such a way that the examiner will be able to draw out the specific content as well as the structure of the work that you have presented. And it is very important that you also look at task 2 of the writing test, because as I said yesterday, task 1 and then task 2 are two different tests altogether, although it is in the same aspect. But task 1 has more expectation than task 2, because if you are expected to use 20 minutes to answer task 1, and then you are expected to use 40 minutes to answer task 2, as well as you're expected to write 150 words in 1 and then 250 words in 2. So you should know that the expectation is twice task 1. Now, most of the times, if we are answering the task 2, we tend to consider, or we tend to see the task 1 as the same as task 2. And then that is some different form of perception that we will have to avoid, because if we look at task 1 as the same as task 2, we will always be caught in the requirements of task 1. Now, when you consider task 1, when you consider task 2, it is mostly not as in a diagram form, or it is not a diagrammatic question where you look at certain features and characteristics and then answer it. But then it is something that is mostly related to an argument, a description, a composition of a particular topic. Now, as I said, when you are writing the academic test, it is mostly different from the general. Now, you want to know how different it is from the general. Now, in the academic test of the writing task 2, you are expected to draw intellectual ideas from the question that is posed. Yeah. You are expected to create some form of intellectual argument because it is academic, but that is not the case in the general. The general's expectation is kind of, I don't want to say it is lower, but the expectation in the academic is kind of involving than the general. So when you are taking the academic test, you should be expected, or you should expect that you'll be required to provide some intellectual discerning of some information, and then intellectual understanding, and then analysis of something. Now, mostly in task 2, you are required to write. You are required to write about an argument, or you are required to share views or to compare two major topics. For instance, healthcare and then maternity, improvement in healthcare, and then mortality rates. So you will be expected to share your ideas in these two. So if healthcare has improved, then it means that people are not going to die as much as they used to. So what is your idea? That is something that you are expected to share and then compare. Now, as usual, as I talked about yesterday, as much as possible, try to organize your write-up in 4 different forms or parts. You try as much as possible to organize your write-up in 4 different parts. Now, the first part should be your introduction. The second part should be a summary of, not actually a summary, an overview of your work. And then the second, and then the third part should be, the third and the final part should be a detailed description and somehow a summary, not actually a conclusion, but somehow a summary of what you have actually written. Sorry. what you have actually discussed. Now, when you are talking about any item that is, sorry, anything that is related to, say, two different things or two different objects where you are to analyze them, you will have to draw a lot of ideas from the topical question. When I say the topical question, I mean by, for instance, if we are talking about two things, marriage and divorce. If you are talking about marriage and divorce, then you are supposed to draw ideas from marriage that will counter your ideas on divorce, especially when you are comparing or when you are expected to draw the disadvantages and advantages between two things. Then you have to look at how you organize them. Now, the most important aspect of this task is that you try as much as possible to complete the task. As we discussed yesterday, anything that you talk about, any aspect of the test that you take, the most important thing in the writing test is for you to be able to complete the task. Now, completing the task is your ability to talk about the question and then answer the question or the topic given to you for discussion. Now, if you are to talk about, say, marriage and divorce, then it means that you have to compare the basic ideas in marriage and then that of the ideas in divorce. Now, in your write-up, you try as much as possible to conclude all ideas in each paragraph. So now, although you can relate previous paragraphs in your subsequent paragraphs, you will have to make sure there is always a conclusive idea in the paragraph that you or in the past paragraph that you write. For instance, in the introductory part, you have to make sure there is a conclusive idea in the introduction. Same applies to paragraph 1. The same applies to the subsequent and the other paragraphs. But then one thing is that each time we look at paragraphing, it doesn't really matter the number of or the amount of sentences that we put in a paragraph. But what matters is the number of ideas that we put there. Now, in task 2, you'll be required to use 40 minutes to write 250 words. Now, you have to make sure you organize your work, you present, and then you compare the information, especially when you are expected to compare two things. Now, you also have to present and justify an opinion. Now, this is something that really is important because the moment you are presenting the information or you are stating a fact, especially in a particular question that is given, you have to be able to justify the information and then the opinion that you are sharing in your write-up. Now, one other thing is that you also have to compare and contrast. In task 2, as I said, you will be expected or you'll be required to state and then to look at two different things and share your opinion. Now, comparing and contrasting is when you look at one factor or the advantage of one factor over the other, or the benefit of one factor over the other. So you don't only look at what you are writing, but you also look at how they connect to each other. So after drawing your conclusive ideas in each paragraph, you compare and contrast all evidences and opinions that you try to share. Now, one other thing, the next thing that you have to do. Now, I don't know whether you are writing, but that is the reason why itemizing them so that those of us who want to write, you can jot them down. Now, let me start again. In task 2, what you have to do. Somebody asking a question? Okay. So in task 2, what you have to do, the first thing that you have to do is to be able to present a solution to the problem if the question demands. So if it's a question that is demanding a solution to the problem in the question, you will have to be able to present that solution to the problem that is posed. That is the first one. The second one is to be able to present and justify your opinions on the subject or on the topic that is given for discussion. So as I said, if you are talking about or you are comparing two things, marriage and divorce, then your write-up should involve opinions that are justifying your opinion on marriage, that of your opinion. One other thing, in addition to this, which is the third one, is for you to be able to compare and then contrast. Compare and contrast. Now, when you are comparing to contrast, then you have to weigh certain relationship that two or more items or topics or ideas have. For instance, if you are relating or if you are comparing a mobile phone to a landline, you have to weigh the advantages and then the disadvantages of a mobile phone to that of a landline, or the relationship that a mobile phone has to the relationship that, the mobile phone has to the landline. So you have to compare and then contrast those opinions on these two items you will be discussing. Now, the next one is also for you to evaluate the challenges or to evaluate an argument if you are required. Sometimes the question is in such a way that you will be expected to argue your information across, or you'll be expected to argue your points. So in this case, if the question is an argument, you have to be able to evaluate and challenge the ideas in the question or the ideas that you will also put across. Please, if you have a question whilst I'm delivering, you can raise your hand and I will answer your question for you. But in the meantime, we are still discussing some of the tips that we need in answering task 2. Okay, so what the other thing is that after evaluating and then challenging the ideas, you also have to provide evidence, or you have to provide some ideological evidence to a particular argument that you are also making on a particular topic that is given. Now, another thing, the next one is communicate an idea to the reader or to the examiner in an appropriate style. Now, the appropriate style is what we have already discussed, that you organize it in such a way that every topical or every paragraph will have a conclusive idea. Now, in this regard, if you are discussing good healthcare and then mortality rates, you should be able to communicate the ideas in one of them in relation to the other. And then whoever reads your write-up will understand and then will know exactly the points that you are talking about. Now, we should also have in mind that all these that we are doing, we should be mindful of the time and then the areas or the categories of scoring, because it is very important. If you are not able to draw much attention to the task completion, then it means that your level of scoring will reduce to an 8 or a 7 or a 6. Okay. So now, one other thing is that when a problem is given to you in task 2, you have to be able to address the problem without straying from the topic or moving away or dancing around the topic. That is when I say you talk too much or you write too much, but you not write enough. I keep saying this because I like how it sounds. talking too much or writing too much and writing enough. So as much as possible, try not to stray away or try not to beat about the bush or to talk so much about something that has little idea or relationship to the question or to the problem in the question, because the major ideas in the question are the ones that will help you to score or to fulfill the cohesion and then coherence. Those are the logical ideas that they will be looking at in order to score you. Because if you are not able to fulfill the task, you're not able to structure it in such a way that the examiner will understand, or if you're not able to know and understand how you structure your work, you will always have a problem with the task 2. Now, the next thing is after being able to address the problem and not straying away from the problem, you have to use correct English, grammar especially. And then you have to be accurate in your writing. As I said, vocabulary, the most important thing in IELTS. Vocabulary and grammar, the most important thing in IELTS, because those are the ones that will give you the score, the band score that you need. Those are the ones that will push you closer to the band score 9 or 8. Those are the ones that will give you the confidence to express yourself, either in the speaking, reading, writing, or the listening. But in the writing task 2, you should try as much as possible to use appropriate language in terms of register, style, content, ideas, organization. These are very important. So that will be the last part of it. You should try as much as possible to use the appropriate language in terms of all these, how you organize your work, the style that you write in it, and then the content of which is the ideas that you are supposed to express in your work. Now, these are the very most important things that we have to actually look at, that we have to consider. Now, if you're able to go through all of this, then you will be able to understand and have the confidence to write out the task 2, unlike the task 1 where you are given a diagram, what to describe. Now, we talked about that one, but then we also go back to how we will address a map, because sometimes it is not only line graph or bar graph that's given. We also have a map and then other things. So we also talk about that. And then sometimes even a table. But then in task 2, you have to present your solution to the problem. You have to present and justify your opinion. You compare and contrast evidence and opinions. You evaluate and challenge ideas, evidence or an argument. Besides, if you are arguing, you will definitely have to be a judge on your ability to express, an ability to differentiate, and then put a particular part or a particular topic on top of the other. Then the next one is you have to be able to communicate your ideas to the reader or the examiner in an appropriate style. Now, you also have to address the problem without talking too much or writing too much or beating about the bush or straying away from the topic. The next thing is you have to use correct grammar. And then you also have to use appropriate language. Now, if you say appropriate language, how do we mean by appropriate language? An appropriate language isn't a language that is language on the streets, in quotes, language on the streets. Sometimes we may be using certain languages, especially on WhatsApp and all of that, that you cannot translate that language or that type of typing into our writing test. So normally when I meet my students, the first thing I tell them is that from now to the time you register your test, you should you should stay away from shorthands and then words that we use socially, because those ones can actually translate from your WhatsApp typing to your writing. So you have to try as much as possible, use appropriate language that will give you, or that you will have a very good expression of the language itself. Now, in simple terms, I would want to describe how, for instance, you are asked to differentiate between two things. If you are asked to differentiate between two things, the first thing that you must do is to understand the question. Because if you don't understand the question, even in communication, if you are having a conversation or a dialogue with someone, and then your ability to understand the person's information that is given you, if you are not able to understand what the person is giving you, you will not be able to reflect and then answer the question properly. But if you get more understanding in the information that is being posed to you, you will be able to respond to it appropriately. So the first thing is that you must understand the question. Now, understanding the question actually asks you, understanding the question actually provide that confidence in you, because now if I ask you, how are you doing today, or how was your day? Because you know how your day went, because you know what happened in the day, in your day, it will be so easy for you to express yourself in a wider scope, or to express yourself for the ideas to come out simply and quickly. And then the other thing that you should also do is to read what you have written, because it is possible that because of maybe tension, you might have written certain things that do not make meaning, or that actually does not sound well or properly when you read it. So anytime you go through your writing, or after taking your writing, you have to first read it before you convert it, or before you submit. Now, sometimes you also have to consider the sentence you're about to write before you write it. Sometimes you will think that, okay, this sentence that I am writing may make sense, but then if you write it down and you read it like twice, you realize that no, it doesn't actually sound right. So you have to consider what you are writing, and you have to read what you have also written. And then the most important thing is, anytime you are expressing ideas in task 2, you have to be very clear on it, because being clear provides a practical understanding on what you have written. Being clear on what in a particular sentence or paragraph makes you feel, or make the reader feel, that you know, or you have control over what you are talking about, or you have control over the English language. Now, it is very easier when you start and then the information is flowing like that. You start, you understand it, you are clear on the things that you are writing, the ideas that you are writing. If you are very clear on all those, it is easier that this information will flow. So you will have to first understand the question, read what you've written, and then you have to be clear on what you have, or the ideas that you are expressing. Now, one other thing is that you try as much as possible to check the number of words that you have written, because if you fail to fulfill or to write the number of words that you are expected, it means that you have not fulfilled the task, because it is expected of you to write 150 words. So if you fail to write this number of words, then it means that your task has not been fulfilled yet. But in each case, you always have to fulfill your task. So you write about what you know. Now, this is very important. We mostly describe that as familiarity. You write about things that you know. Sometimes Somebody will be writing about medicine or health issues, or yes, health issues or technology, but the person may not have enough ideas on that particular topic. So you don't have to look at the things that you have heard somewhere, which you don't have much idea about. So you have to try as much as possible to write about what you know. So if it is about marriage and divorce, you write whatever you know about marriage and you write whatever you know about divorce. If it is about healthcare and then mortality, you write things that you know. You organize your ideas on the things that you know, but not on the general issue, or you try to share, or that is when you talk too much or you write too much without drawing much information on the question that is given. Because if you write things about unfamiliar things, or unfamiliar ideas or unfamiliar topics and then items, you will definitely be going astray, trying to organize your information using so many words. But then if you write about things that you know, definitely the things and the ideas will flow whilst you are organizing it. Now, the next one is for you to follow the standard structure. You have to follow the standard structure. Now, what is the standard structure? The standard structure first is for you to get 250 words in task 2. That is the standard for the exam. For you to get 250 words in task 2. The second standard is for you to organize your work in 4 different parts. Part 1 is the introduction. Part 2 is the overview. Part 3 is the specific details, or the specific details. And then the last part is the summary of the work of your write-up. Now, one thing is that you should try as much as possible to make sure with this standard structure, every part of the structure has a conclusive idea. That is very important. Now, the next thing that we want to also talk about, the next thing we have to consider is you don't have to write too many words. Too many words is that, a lot of so many things when they are put together might actually have a small kind of concrete or lexical idea in those number of words. So you don't write so much, but then you try as much as possible, as much as that you are writing, your information or the argument that is being drawn from what you are discussing will actually be identified in your write-up. The next thing is you have to choose your writing style properly. The writing style is important because you don't have to use informal languages in academic writing or in your essay. You don't have to use informal. When we say informal languages, I believe we know what formal letter is and what informal letter is. That is the relationship that they have. Informal language, especially in academic tests. So those of us who are going to take the academic test, have to take note of this. In the task 2 of our writing, you don't have to use informal words. You have to choose your writing style properly. But if I were you, no matter the type of test I'm going to take, whether general or academic, to be on the safer side, I will always opt for the formal form of writing. So that is the type of style that you will choose. The next one is that we don't have to learn models, or we don't have to commit some answers into memory. That particular one will saturate and dilute the information and the information we provide on the question. Sometimes we have practice tests. So yes, we all go through the practice test, especially those of us who are studying by ourselves. We go through the practice tests, but all those practice tests that we are going through and then the sample tests that we have or that we get to see, read, and watch on the internet, we don't have to commit them into memory, but we actually have to look at the format, the standard that they set in answering those questions, or the structure of the answering of the question. But we don't have to commit it into memory, saying and expect that if we have a question that is nearly or close to what we have committed in memory, we will write the same thing. IELTS doesn't work that way. It is every year has its own expectation, or every test date. So if you are writing this, if I'm writing the test in this month, the expectation will be different from the person who will write it next month. So the standard of expectation is actually not the same, whereas the format. So you should not actually commit anything into memory. The only thing that you can, or you are allowed to commit into memory, is vocabulary and then synonyms and then maybe idiomatic expressions. Even with that, you don't have to commit it into memory, but you have to understand them before you can use them in your write-up. Okay, so in addition to choosing our writing style correctly or properly, we don't have to learn, sorry, but I've already talked about that. So we don't also have to branch off. Now, this is the same, or this is in relation to going astray. This is in relation to going astray. So you will have to go straight to the point, express your ideas in such a way and manner that will give specifics in your write-up, but then you don't have to talk or speak or write too much. Now, finally, we write clearly and coherently. Now, yesterday I explained coherence and then cohesion. So if we are taking a speaking test, we do not repeat ourselves with words and expression. So you try to avoid repetition of words and expression. So if you have a particular word like, say, avoid, if you have this word, if you want to repeat this word, you try to repeat the word in its synonym form. So you don't repeat the same word in a different sentence, you repeat it in a different sentence, and you continuously repeating it. That makes your work very vague, and it doesn't actually show you have enough vocabulary to discuss issues. But as much as possible, try to provide synonyms to words that you would want to repeat. So if you have a word like avoid, you can still use words like refrain from or get away from or something like that. Those words are related to avoidance. That is when you are able to understand the word and you are able to digest the word to have the various synonyms in relation to the meaning. So you don't actually have to repeat yourself in those write-ups. Now, these are the various tips that we need in answering a typical question in task 2. Now, if you are taking the task 2 in the writing test, as much as possible, the very most important